Okay, this game begins with d4 and black plays d5. And here, Sam, really think you should play c4. It's probably the best way to go with this. Instead, you play knight c3, which, I mean, is playable, just not the best. Karthik here played knight f6. You might also want to try c5. Same idea as c4. But knight f6 is just fine. White, at this point, I mean, knight f3 would be good. My mouse is a little stuck. Also, bishop f4 is probably what I would play. Notice that the knight and the bishop can work together against the c7 square. Instead, though, Sam, this is not what you should play. e4. e4 loses a pawn. So you definitely don't want to play e4 here. Now, Karthik takes with the pawn. Actually, might be better off here taking with the knight. Because if you look at this here, knight takes, d takes, and now notice how the pawn on e4 is preventing knight f3. And if white tries to get rid of that pawn by playing f3, then you can actually play e5 here. And if you were to take that e5 pawn, you take the queen with check, and then you can defend the pawn like that. And if he were to play f takes e4 there, then you have queen h4 check, which is very strong because that e4 pawn's undefended. Of course, g3 doesn't work at all. Check. And we played d takes e4. And now notice here, if white plays f3, this isn't so bad for white, because if you try that same idea with e5, d takes e5, queen takes, king takes d1, and the big difference here is that knight is still sitting on f6, and this knight is still sitting on c3. So you got to move that black knight, and now that knight can come forward, and it's actually threatening the fork right there. So you got to defend that. And so here white's actually up a pawn. Compare this to that, and that's the difference. So knight takes would be better here. Right here, of course, like I said, white should play f3. Try to get that pawn out of e4. Sam plays d5. Now, if there'd been a knight right there, then d5 would probably be a good move. But otherwise, you're just moving a pawn, and it's kind of a waste of a move. And you're also moving a pawn onto a square where it's, under more pressure. So you're kind of weakening the pawn. f3 would have definitely been better there. After d5, black Probably c6 would have been good, or e6 would have been good. You know, just come forward and try to, get rid of that pawn. Black played bishop f5 to defend the pawn. I mean, there's not really any pressing need to do that because the pawn's already defended. And now here, Sam plays g4. Hopefully you can see what's wrong with that already. I think bishop f4 would have been better. Once again, trying to go up that way. Bishop c4, probably your best move actually. Putting some pressure towards f7, and it also happens to defend the pawn. Knight ge2 would have been good. g4 loses a pawn. Hold on, computer error. I can solve this. There we go. g4. Because black can just take it. And now Sam moves his queen. Better, you want to develop pieces. So bishop e2 would have been really good. Either forces his bishop to move or trade or something. And more importantly, gets your bishop off f1. Queen d2, it actually blocks this poor bishop in. And now Karthik plays e6. c6 might have been a little better. It's easily compensated there if he trades with knight takes c6. In contrast, if he played e6, which is what he played, now here white can disrupt black's pawns. Just take it, and then queen takes, bishop takes, and f takes, and you got kind of two weak pawns right there. So c6 would have been a little better here, but e6 is fine. And instead of d takes e6, now Sam plays bishop b5 check, and that's easily stopped with c6. And at this point, Sam retreats the bishop, and you got to realize this pawn right here is about to die, so you really need to, trade that off somehow. If you went for d takes e6, queen takes, bishop takes, you lose the bishop. So you d takes c6, knight takes. Bishop c4 doesn't work at all because of e takes d5. And when you guys are doing notation, you really need to specify which pawn is capturing. C takes or e takes. Otherwise, it's not exactly clear. E takes d5 is good. And here, maybe, you should really do something about this bishop that's sitting right there. This bishop's under attack, so, this makes a lot of sense right there, bishop e2. Another way maybe would have been to play h3, and, if he takes this bishop, that messes up his pawn center. And if he moves his bishop, then you can play back to bishop b3. Either way would have been good. f4 though, not so good. You know, all you have to do here, Karthik, is, you know, just take that bishop, and you're up a bishop there and 3 pawns. But you didn't take the bishop. You played knight bd7, and now Sam moves the bishop back to f1. You really don't want to move back to your starting square. You know, bishop b3 would have been better. Bishop e2 would have been better. h3 is still playable. Bishop f1 is kind of, you know, just backwards. Here, Karthik played b5. You know, pawn moves aren't so great unless there's really a reason. And I can kind of see, like, yeah, you're trying to push your pawns and everything, but before you develop all these pawns too far, it's probably better to develop your pieces. So, like, bishop c5 gets this really nice diagonal right there. That would have been better. b5. And of course here you can kind of see the problem with playing stuff like b5 is white is able to, you know, counterattack a little. a4 is good. Black continues pushing with d4. And, you know, notice here, well, never mind. d4, yeah. I don't really like d4. You know, you can just take it right there. It's not bad though. And the reason it's not bad is because black still has this idea, which is pretty good. But I don't like to give up pawns really at all. d4. Definitely probably should have taken that pawn though, Sam. Instead you played knight ce2. And now your position's starting to get a little cramped. Here, black played bishop f5. I mean, there's really no reason to move that bishop. It's happy where it is. There's no reason to defend that e4 pawn. Much better would have been d3. And if he like takes it, now you can play knight c5. And of course the idea is to get that fork right there. So basically d3 is trying to clear out that c pawn so that the knight can go right there. And the other nice thing about knight c5 is if he just kind of, you know, tries to prevent knight b3 by, say, playing queen c3, well, now the knight can go right there. And that's also a really good square. If he plays king d1, you got bishop b4. And of course the knight is defending the bishop. You know, you could try to take that pawn check. King moves. And actually, the king's under a real threat there. So he probably has to move his king. And that would give you rook c8. So that idea of knight c5 is really strong. Go in here. Yeah, knight c5. But bishop f5 doesn't really do anything cool like that. In fact, all white has to do now is take that d4 pawn. That would be good. Instead, Sam played knight g3, which isn't so good. Karthik then plays e3, which is very strong, getting those pawns attacking his queen, and they're continuing to advance. Of course, white still has queen takes d4, which would be great. Queen d1, not so great. And now bishop b4 check would have been good. Bishop g4 is, it's okay. It's just not as good. You're better off getting two bishops into the game than just shuffling that one bishop back and forth. And of course here, white still has queen takes d4, which is better than knight to e2. I mean, Sam right now really only has one piece developed, and it's on e2. Here, Karthik played h5, and yeah, that defends the bishop, but, I mean, there's no reason to defend the bishop. Bishop's happy. Try to get something else moving down there. For example, knight e4 is really good, threatening to go right there. Much better than h5. And here, Sam, I really like queen takes d4, which is better than f5. And once again, black has bishop b4 check. Also, knight e4 is really good right here. C5 is just another one of those pawn moves that, it doesn't really change anything, does it? It's just, slowly going forward. Sam continued with bishop g2. And Karthik did queen a5 check, which is, I mean, it works. A little better, though, once again, knight e4. And if he were to take the knight, you have queen h4 check. And this king is really running out of options. If he just slides over, that's checkmate. And if he tries knight g3 to block that, you have bishop takes d1, loses the queen. So queen a5 check is good, but there's a very similar move on the other side of the board with queen h4 check. And all you have to do first is play knight e4. But there's queen a5 check, c3 trying to block it. Rook d8's a great move. And now, Sam probably should have continued with like knight f3, try and develop his pieces. b4 is not so good. In a situation like this, Karthik, you should really need to be like, well, why don't I just take the pawn that's right there? Just take it. And here, if Sam finally took that d4 pawn, you can follow up with bishop c5, and the queen has to move, and then you can take that a4 pawn. And I mean, that's looking pretty good, because if he takes there, bishop takes. If he were to just take right here, what are you going to do? Oh, yeah, bishop takes b4 check. Instead, Karthik, you played knight e5. And if you really look at it, I mean, where's that knight going? It's kind of, Not got a lot of scope right there. And it's also really missing the obvious B takes A5. You lose your queen. But in fact, at this point, white's winning this right now. Black played D3, which is probably the best way to go. Try to get down into white's position. And now here, Sam, you really got to realize you don't have any pieces that are very well developed. And you've got a really good idea here, recognizing if queen went here and here, you know, that might really start to change the game around. I would recommend queen to b3. You know, and yeah, he'll take that knight right there, perhaps. But after queen takes check, black has a lot of problems. If he plays king e7, you can just slide over with another check. Plays knight fd7, and take that pawn. And basically you traded your knight for a couple pawns, and you're still up the queen. Rook b8, queen a6, bishop e7, knight takes e2, and black's really got nothing left to win the game with. You know, actually right here, black would have been a little better even playing maybe d2 check, but it's still kind of the same thing. The bishop takes, pawn takes, and then the king just slides over. And at this point, you know, black's really got nothing to win with. You know, so queen b3 would, you know, queen wants to go to b3, but c4 lets black win the game. D takes e2. It's a good move. You know, essentially, the difference between c4 and queen b3 is with queen b3, yeah, you're giving up the knight on e2. Oops. But you're gaining, you know, some mobility with your queen. But with just c4, you're still giving up the knight, and you're not really gaining anything from that. Probably the best thing to do here actually would have been knight takes, but I mean it still loses the queen because a rook takes d1. But even worse is, you know, trying to save the queen, like with queen c2. I mean, this is really nice, Karthik. Rook d1 check forces a checkmate right there. So that's that game. If you guys watch this, you should let me know, or honestly, you should like try to watch this, try to go through the game and find something that you don't understand or that I didn't explain very well and ask a question, because I mean chess is pretty complicated, so there's a lot, you know, going on, and you should definitely ask a question because I can probably answer it, and then you will hopefully learn something.